but it's really serious. So the Nigerian Cattle Crisis is essentially focused on the Fulanis. Fulanis are tribes people who are one of the last nomadic people in the world. They travel around with cattle, using that as their main resources for life, currency, social class, everything goes around cattle. And basically, they graze the land, and they'll work their ways down to port areas, or just around as the land then regenerates the forage needed to raise livestock. In recent years, is the water levels in Lake Chad, in which the Fulanis kind of hang around up toward northern Nigeria, has been going down very exponential rates, which in turn leads to lower streams, lower creek levels, and ultimately desertification has taken place. Fulanis left with no choice but to head further south, where croplands take over the land in terms of agriculture and land usages. Well, that did not go too well in terms that the cropland farmers became vigilantes. They did not want these cow people coming in, tearing up their lands. And therefore, there was an exchange of fire, and now it's been a 20-year war between the two. Whereas Fulanis just trying to get land, trying to feed their livestock, and crop people trying to support their own families and protect their lands. The government has come into place, and they have banned grazing in many areas, and have actually sent armies to go against it. At a global level, the Fulanis are now recognized as terrorists and have had over 19,000 deaths in the last 20 years. Now, why does that matter? What does that have to do over there have to do with us? As we continue throughout our research in agriculture, we're looking a lot towards Africa, a place that is still being developed. And if we're still going to be developed, that means cropland is going to be continue to be used. As resources are still going to be used, and these water levels are going to continue to go down as the world gets hotter, as we've seen in current trends. We need to go ahead and figure out now, how can we solve these issues, and so that when these arise again in other countries, how will we tackle them? My personal recommendations are to take open grazing reserves, as well as zoning areas. There needs to be a survey done where people are able to identify what's best for grazing, what's best for cropland, and then make those grazing areas into reserves where Fulanis can be in peace. Next, I would encourage a Lucina grass / native grass project, where we plant these different types of genetics of grasses and forages that are really versatile in desert areas to be able to add forward for the livestock. Next, we need to have agricultural sustainable intensification within our water usages in the croplands, so that less water is being used, and so we can maybe take back control of the waterways. And lastly, we need to have government support and roundtable discussions between the Fulani tribes people, the crop farmers, major CEOs of companies, and the government, so that policies can be made to Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That was great. And now from our experts.
So Caden, I just had a general question about how, I think you partly addressed that, how to reconcile these this nomadic existence with stationary societies. So is this idea of having these large areas where apparently the nomadic tribesmen could continue their traditional ways, is that something that's been studied in terms of just its not just economic but cultural viability? Is that already being tried?
Yeah, so one thing I think about whenever I think about the Fulanis, I think a lot about Native American Indians, and how oftentimes our history classes we talk about how they were forced into reserves, we took over their lands, we took away their culture, and how we're constantly being scolded as Americans for that. And so I feel like we need to learn from our mistakes now, and we need to go ahead and make sure that doesn't happen there. Because we shouldn't go against culture. We shouldn't go against and say the Fulani's culture is bad. Because if it works for them, I think that is for them. Now, eventually, as we continue throughout life, social trends will change, and eventually cultures will change, as we've seen throughout the thousands of years we've been on this planet. And so I feel like right now we need to have grazing reserves. We need to have these places where we can encourage cultural sustainability as well as economic sustainability to be trading within them, And we can offer services and goods between the two and ultimately build a society together instead of against.
So Caden, one quick follow-up. I'm just kind of thinking about how that cattle, obviously they need to be provided food year-round. Crops, there may be some seasonality to that. I'm just thinking about, one byproduct of cattle is fertilizer. So I'm wondering, has there been any thought as to how to reconcile potentially the idea that these cattle could produce fertilizer that may actually benefit the growth of the crops in these more sedentary societies?
Right. So one thing I've always kind of thought about when it comes to fertilizer and waste from cattle is that it's actually an Australian system. What they do is they have this giant pasture and they put off in sections. The cattle will come in, will graze on it, and release the manure. And whenever they come back through a series of sections in a circle, they come back to this one where that manure have been grown the forage back up even at a faster rate with more nutrients available. So I feel like you can tackle that two ways. You can have one, a production of manure to go back to croplands for being an organic fertilizer, but also you can keep it within the system and then continue the productivity of the cattle. So it can go either or, and I would believe that would be more for economists to kind of look at to determine that.
Thanks, Caden.
Caden, thank you so much, because I think this is such a fascinating topic that it really encompasses so many facets of agriculture production, right? Is that we have to consider cultural implications, climate change, and having, I've worked in Africa and I realize, wow, it's such a different environment there. So many things that we take for granted here in the US, where our soil is